Eric Daniels, my office immediately.
Eric, here he comes. And he's going to go right past here. We'll see him. And now he's going through here.
Ah, Eric, right here, Eric. Right here, right this way. Okay, you ready? All right. Now, I'm always on the lookout for new Acme agents. I think you've got potential now. But I want to ask you a question. You ready? Yes. Listen carefully. From which direction do the prevailing winds blow in most of the contiguous United States? West, east, or south?
West.
Absolutely right, West. I knew you had potential. Here's your Carmen sweatshirt. Wear it in good health. And next is Meredith Garnitha, my office.
Meredith, where'd she come? Good luck, Meredith. Come on, come right this way. Right to the chief's office. Good luck to you. See ya.
Ah, Meredith, right here, Meredith. Come right over here. Now, you know I'm looking for agents, and I think you've got what it takes, but I got a question. You ready? Listen carefully. What is the name for a tropical cyclone that forms in the southwest Pacific Ocean? Tornado? Typhoon? Blizzard?
Typhoon.
What was that?
Typhoon.
Typhoon is absolutely right. I knew you had potential. Here's your Carmen sweatshirt. Wear it with pride. Next, we have Scott Malone, my office.
Malone, right, Scott. Come on, bud. Good luck, buddy. Let's do it. Come on, pal. Careful on these wires. Right through there. Good luck.
All right, Scott, right here, Scott, a little closer. All right, Scott, I've got a question for you. You ready?
Yeah.
Listen carefully. On January 1st, 1989, an extensive free trade agreement went into effect between the United States and what country? Japan, South Africa, or Canada?
Japan.
No, Scott, it was Canada, but I know you've got potential. You take this atlas, you hone your skills of observation, and you come back here gumshoes. And remember, the Acme motto. Acme agents will be there, catching crooks with special flair. This program was bankrolled by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
This program was brought to you by Toyota.
This is PBS. From the swamps of the South to the grasslands of the Midwest, European settlers pushed back the frontiers of North America. In Florida, the conquistadors were searching for gold. In the Midwest, Lewis and Clark were looking for a river route to the Pacific. What they found was a world unlike any they had seen before. See it for yourself next time on Land of the Eagle, a nature special presentation.
And take another look at Iowa tonight through Wednesday at 8.
Be in the front row when Iowa Public Television presents the 1991 All-State Music Festival. More than 1,000 of the state's most talented high school musicians performing in the all-state band, chorus, and orchestra this Thanksgiving Day at 6:30, only on Iowa Public Television.
Next time on Frontline,
all of us, all hostages.
The untold story of Terry Waite and Oliver North.
North was, I'm sure, delighted to have discovered Terry Waite.
Was Terry Waite a victim of Oliver North's secret deals to trade arms for hostages?
He provided cover for North's operation because it made it much easier for North to conceal what was really going on.
The secret story of Terry Waite, a Frontline special report.
See it tomorrow night at 10:30.
Iowa Public Television.
TV worth watching. IPTV.
Where available, MacNeil Lehrer Newshour can be heard with Spanish translation by using the second audio program channel on your stereo TV or stereo VCR. Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television. And the Iowa broadcast is made possible by CRST, a family-owned company based in Iowa and a major truck carrier in the United States, which is proud to support the MacNeil Lehrer News Hour.
Buenas noches. A la cabeza de las noticias hoy lunes, el presidente Bush dice que vetará el proyecto antidelincuencia y el portavoz del gobierno, Fitzwater, niega que el cargo de su Nuno esté en peligro. Los detalles en breve en el resumen informativo, Jim. Tras el resumen informativo, la pugna en torno al proyecto antidelincuencia según los senadores DeCONCINI y SIMPSON y según dos custodios de la ley. Luego, los incendios de Oakland, California, y el ensayista Jim Fisher y la vida sin la sombra de guerra nuclear.
Los fondos para el noticiero Newshour han sido suministrados por PepsiCo. Día a día nos deleitamos de que la gente sea fría con nosotros, que nos corte en pedazos, que se ponga fresca con nosotros, que nos desgarce y que nos llame gallina. Pues cuanto más lo hace, más felices nos hace. PepsiCo. Y por la AT&T. Y por la Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Y se presenta gracias al apoyo financiero de televidentes como usted.
El señor Bush y los demócratas se enfrentaron respecto al proyecto antidelincuencia. Un comité bicameral llegó a una transacción anoche, pero el señor Bush dijo que eso debilitaría el sistema penal y que vetará esa versión. El proyecto de $3,000 millones fija la pena capital para como 50 delitos federales e impone un lapso de espera de 5 días para la compra de armas de fuego. La pugna principal es en torno a dos disposiciones que limitarían la cantidad de apelaciones que hagan los prisioneros y que prohibiría el uso de pruebas obtenidas ilegalmente. Hablaron los congresistas antes de que empezara el debate en el Pleno y dice, nadie quiere torpedear el proyecto antidelincuencia, pero no se puede pretender haber hecho algo y alejarse de la ley. Es un debilitamiento de nuestras leyes federales de delincuencia, el habeas corpus, la pena capital, la regla de la exclusión, lo admisible de las confesiones. Es el proyecto más duro que ha aprobado el Congreso en un decenio y el presidente dice que lo ha de vetar. Prueba que al presidente no le importa absolutamente nada los millones de personas que son víctimas de asaltos, violaciones sexuales, asesinatos. Le importa mucho más tener un tema político para el 92. Y le gusta decir que los demócratas no son suficientemente duros. Tendremos más sobre el tema después, Robert. El presidente Bush se concentró en los temas nacionales. Esta mañana habló sobre algunos de los problemas de la nación durante una ceremonia pre-Día de Acción de Gracias en la Casa Blanca y dijo, Acción de Gracias es un feriado muy estadounidense y agradecemos al Señor por sus bendiciones de la libertad, la seguridad y la paz. Y también recordamos a aquellos estadounidenses que están sin trabajo, en mala salud o solos. Y buscamos soluciones con los problemas que encara nuestra nación, especialmente el dar más esperanzas ante la falta de techo y de comida. Después fue a Columbus, Ohio, donde visitó a unos profesores en un centro infantil. Después, en una concentración, pidió que se aprobase su programa de reforma educativa y dijo que los que más han de ganar son los de bajos ingresos. Dijo que sus propuestas darán a los padres más capacidad de optar entre escuelas públicas y privadas, algo que los ricos ya pueden hacer. El portavoz presidencial Fitzwater hoy negó rumores de que el jefe de gabinete Johnson I esté en peligro de perder su cargo. Dijo que cree que nunca ha estado en peligro su cargo. A la primera dama, Barbara Bush, se le preguntó acerca de que si estaba descontenta con el desempeño de su nuno y que si quería cambiarlo. La señora Bush habló con la prensa durante una ceremonia en que aceptó el árbol de Navidad de la Casa Blanca y dijo, no es verdad y es algo feo y no me gusta. Él sabe que no es verdad. Cuando el presidente Bush volvió a la Casa Blanca esa tarde, se negó a contestar las preguntas de la prensa sobre su nuno. Dijo que el pueblo de Ohio estaba interesado en la economía y que no le hicieron preguntas sobre lo que pasaba en la Casa Blanca. El nuevo jefe del Seguro Federal dio una advertencia al Congreso hoy. Dijo que el Seguro Federal no podrá rescatar a más bancos en quiebra, a no ser que el Congreso consiga el dinero rápidamente. El comité bicameral se reunió esta tarde para resolver diferencias.
It is likely to include a $70 billion taxpayer loan to keep the insurance fund afloat. FDIC Chairman William Taylor told the Senate Banking Committee this morning delay would drive costs even higher.
We need the money. We need all of it. I think any kind of a piecemeal approach to this would be a mistake, and I think we ought to have the money and get on with this job, no matter what method we select to do these failures, and I think new methods have to be brought in. But the message I've been trying to convey is that the money is needed. The money is needed now.
Federal indictments were announced today against 13 people in a money laundering operation. It allegedly funneled Colombian drug money through U.S. banks, much of it through banks in Rhode Island. 12 of the 13 people have been arrested. A U.S. attorney said $250 to $500 million passed through the banks. He said the money came from a major cocaine cartel based in the Colombian city of Cali.
The space shuttle Atlantis, which was launched Sunday night from Cape Canaveral today, successfully deployed a Defense Department spy satellite. The 5,200-pound probe is designed to detect and report missile launches and nuclear detonations. The 6-man crew is expected to remain in space for 10 days.
Brush fire near Los Angeles forced evacuations and freeway closings today. High winds whipped the fire through more than 1,000 acres of hillsides in the Los Angeles suburb of Sylmar. About 100 residents were evacuated and 2 freeways were shut down before the fire was contained. No injuries or major damage was reported. Investigators do not yet know what started the fire.
Mikhail Gorbachev's plan to keep the Soviet Union together suffered another setback today. The leaders of 7 Soviet republics were expected to approve the plan at a meeting with Gorbachev near Moscow, but they failed to do so. Instead, they agreed only to send the draft of the treaty to their respective parliaments for consideration. In Washington, the Senate approved up to $500 million in new Soviet aid. The money would help the Soviet Union dismantle nuclear weapons that Gorbachev has promised to destroy. The House is yet to vote on the aid. In Yugoslavia, a ceasefire brokered by the United Nations held across most of the Croatian Republic today. Federal Army guns pounded the city of Osijek early in the day, but stopped before noon. We have more on this report, narrated by Vera Frankel of Worldwide Television News.
Monday's lull in the fighting gave the people of besieged Osijek a chance to get out. In Belgrade, the Red Cross looked after these mainly Serbian evacuees. Only 50,000 of Osijek's 140,000 residents are thought to remain. The rest have fled, fearing more intensive fighting. Osijek's hospitals are crammed with injured civilians and fighters. Officials say 7 people died and another 34 were wounded by shelling in the previous 24 hours. Attacks here on Osijek intensified after the fall of nearby Vukovar to federal troops last week. If Osijek and nearby Vinkovci suffer similar defeats, then Serbia's writ would be wider. In Zagreb, federal troops continued their evacuation of barracks after weeks of blockading by Croatian fighters. Operations were conducted under the terms of the latest ceasefire and under the watch of European community observers. This latest truce was not put together by the community, but by the United Nations. 13 European-mediated truces have all failed. The UN may send in peacekeeping forces to buffer the warring factions, but not unless there's a permanent halt to fighting. Croatians now fear a last-minute grab for their territory before any peacekeepers can arrive.
Lebanon today accepted the invitation to the December 4th Mideast peace talks in Washington. Jordan accepted Friday. There has been no official response yet from the Palestinians, Syria, and Israel. An Israeli cabinet minister today said Israel would go to Washington if later talks are held in the Middle East. There were reports of heavy artillery exchanges between Israeli and Lebanese troops today. They were in Israel's self-declared security zone in South Lebanon and followed the killing of 3 Lebanese soldiers in a separate attack there. Lebanese troops were deployed in the area in July. Today's fatalities are believed to be the first from Israeli fire.
Freed hostage Thomas Sutherland arrived back in the U.S. today. He left Germany earlier with his wife and 2 of his daughters. Sutherland was freed in Lebanon November 18th after more than 6 years in captivity. He and his family flew via Dallas to San Francisco, where they'll spend the Thanksgiving holiday weekend with a 3rd daughter. That's it for the news summary. Now it's on to the politics of the crime bill. Rebuilding after Oakland's big fire. and a Jim Fisher essay.
The latest Washington word fight over who is the toughest on crime is our lead story tonight. The centerpiece of the argument this time is a new crime bill. House and Senate negotiators, with Democrats in the majority, reported it out to their respective floors last night. We pick up the story with a KWAME Holman backgrounder.
The crime bill is compromise legislation as far as the House and Senate are concerned, a blend of their respective bills approved earlier this year. But some Republicans don't consider it a compromise. They call it soft on crime and charge the Democrats bullied their way through the rare weekend session of the House-Senate Conference Committee where the final bill was written.
The Democrats just rolled us over on every vote that was had. We were outnumbered, outgunned. We were everything but out-argued, and that doesn't count.
Strom Thurmond of South Carolina originally had held up final action by protesting the Democrats' 5-3 majority among Senate conferees. Stephen Sims of Idaho threatened to block the bill because of tough language on gun control. Democrats appealed to the president.
So, Mr. President, like they're replaying the movie E.T., you know, it's his phone home. Phone the Senate. Talk to the Republicans. Tell them, let the crime bill go.
Republicans dropped their demands, and when conferees met this weekend, several provisions sailed through with few objections. For instance, the death penalty was extended to some 50 federal crimes, including acts of espionage, treason, and terrorism resulting in murder, for the murders of federal officials, and for major drug trafficking crimes. Conferees adopted the Senate's version of handgun control, which calls for a 5-day purchase waiting period to enable police to conduct background checks. But the conferees rejected the Senate's ban on the manufacture and sale of 14 assault-style weapons. House and Senate negotiators also approved money for hiring more federal, state, and local law enforcement personnel. The partisan disputes erupted over two provisions in particular. On habeas corpus appeals relating to the death penalty, Democrats demanded the less restrictive language approved by the House. It sets a 1-year deadline for filing appeals of death sentences and bars successive petitions without new facts. And Democrats chose the milder Senate language to amend the so-called exclusionary rule. It says evidence seized using an invalid search warrant can be introduced in trials as long as police acted in good faith. The House version would have allowed use of evidence even if seized with no warrant. The full House and Senate will vote on the crime bill before they recess for the year on Wednesday. Democrats who challenged the president to veto the crime bill got their answer today.
The conference committee, it's the way it works back in Washington, last night reported a bill that is simply not acceptable. So let me be clear, I would have to veto this bill because it would weaken our criminal justice system. We need a stronger criminal justice system today, and I think all the communities and families across our country understand that.
Now to two members of the conference committee, Senator Dennis DeCONCINI, Democrat of Arizona, who was one of the conferees who voted for the bill. Senator Alan Simpson, Republican of Wyoming, the Senate Minority Whip, was a member who did not. They join us tonight from Capitol Hill. Senator Simpson, do you agree with President Bush that this bill weakens the criminal justice system of the United States?
Well, I can certainly tell you it weakens the congressional system of the United States. We went to a conference yesterday, and the first time any of us ever saw the language was at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. We had a conference at 3:30 yesterday, Sunday. The Democrats on the House side pushed it before us. It's just a bunch of descriptions by paragraphs. It doesn't have any substance to it. The Republicans never saw it. The Republicans in the Senate never saw it, and the Democrats in the Senate never saw it until 2:15. That's a travesty. We still have not seen the language of the bill, and it is not the House bill, and it's not the Senate bill. It's a hybrid bill that nobody has ever seen. That is really extraordinary.
But so in other words, your opposition to it isn't based on substance, it's based on not knowing what's in it?
That is exactly true, and if you will, I know that's hard for the American people to understand, so I wouldn't see them get too excited about calling home. They ought to call their congressman and say, how could you ram through a bill, a crime bill? We know what's in the House measure. We saw that. We know what's in the Senate, but we do not know what's in this measure.
Obviously the president does. He said a while ago he was going to veto it because it weakened the criminal justice system.
We've gotten the pieces of it, which is simply the description, which was about 10 or 15 pages, just says House proposal. And there's enough on there to decide to veto it, I can tell you that.
Well, what is there? Is there anything, any clue you can give me as to what's in that bill that you don't like?
Well, it weakens what it does with one breath in saying, well, we're going to do this with habeas corpus. It simply takes back in the next breath. What they do is change existing law, repeal Supreme Court cases. The exclusionary rule is weakened. Every major piece of the bill is weakened to be pro-crime instead of anti-crime. That's a sad thing.
Senator DeCONCINI, that's a serious charge that you Democrats are turning out a crime bill that's actually pro-crime.
Well, I've heard a lot of things said here in the last few days, and it's so grossly unfair to say that. Let me just read to my friend Alan a letter I just received today from the National Association of Police Organizations, and that's from Robert Scully, the president. It says, Dear Senator DeCONCINI, I'm writing on behalf of 135 rank-and-file police officer members. Goes on to say that we believe the version which has been reported out of the conference to be a tough anti-crime legislation which goes a long way towards meeting the acknowledged needs for substantial improvement in America's criminal justice system. Here's 135 police officers who think this is a tough crime bill, not a pro-crime bill. So, I mean, this is ridiculous. Let me just point out a couple of things this bill does. It puts in 51 death penalties in the federal statutes that are not there now. Federal death for 51 crimes that are not covered now. And these are crimes that my friend Alan Simpson has supported for a long time. Drug kingpins, murder when in the course of a rape, murder by hire, drive-by shootings. These are shooting of a law enforcement officer. You know, I didn't get everything I wanted in that bill. I'm disappointed it doesn't have the assault weapons provision. But when you have a 300-page bill, we've been working on this for 3 years now. We know what's in the bill. We can say, oh, well, it just came across as a proposal. Negotiations, that's what legislation's all about. And that's what we did. We passed a 300-page, real tough crime bill that's going to bring us $3 billion more federal resources towards law enforcement, local and state, and federal law enforcement that we don't have today. Now, it's not everything I want and not everything that Alan Simpson wants, but it's in the right direction. I don't see how anybody can say this is a pro-crime instead of an anti-crime bill.
Senator Simpson.
Well, it's interesting to read a letter like that. I don't know what the date of it is, but it sure couldn't be very current because we don't know at this hour, hear this, we do not know at this hour what is in this bill. Now, if that's shocking to you, let it be so. Now, that's where we are on this extraordinary measure. It won't be, we already are at 500 pages. They're printing it. We're told they're printing it. This isn't a 300-page bill. It's a 600-page bill, and it is not the House bill, and it is not the Senate bill.
You said that a minute ago, Senator, but there must be enough that you have read that causes you to oppose it, right? To say that it works for crime rather than against crime.
I am saying that that is not my definition. It was called a pro-crime bill by others, and I'm saying to you that there are many provisions in it from what we have seen from the simple skeleton that was presented to us yesterday. It said things like House position with modifications. We said, what are the modifications? Well, we've added this penalty and that penalty. All I'm saying to you is that the members of this committee, Democrat and Republican alike in the Senate, have not seen this bill.
Well, let me just say a couple of things that's in this bill that the senator knows are in there, that was in the past bill we have that creates a boot camp. 8,000 new positions for prisoners to go to learn how to correct their behavior and have some motivation. That's a tough anti-crime provision. That's in this bill. $1 billion to local law enforcement that is not there today to help coordinate the local and national drug coordination. That's a tough anti-crime bill when you have that kind of stuff.
Let me ask,
that was in the bill, that was in the Senate side, and that's in the bill that was passed today.
Well, Senator Simpson, then let's be specific. Do you oppose the 5-day waiting period for handgun sales?
The Senate provision is what we adopted. That's about the only thing we did yesterday. We adopted that. I come from a state where gun control is just how steady you hold your weapon. I can't play with that one in any sense. So it's very clear that the Senate bill was adopted. The assault weapons provision went out,
right,
but it went out not from me.
All right. Now, how do you feel about the death penalty for the 51 additional crimes? Are you opposed to that?
No, I'm not. But I'm telling you that in this proposal, we already know enough in the stuff that's been leaking out to us that they say they've strengthened the death penalty in the 51, and then they have gone around and repealed 5 or 10 Supreme Court decisions, or 2 or 3, every time they gave up on, say, habeas corpus or exclusionary rule or death penalty, which looks good. They came around and deftly in this huge bill put it back in.
Look, I think we're not going to resolve that part of this tonight, but Senator DeConcini, your colleagues, your Democratic colleagues, Congressman Schumer and some your Senate, also some in the Senate, have suggested that what Senator Simpson, the President, and other Republicans are looking for is a 1992 campaign issue to run on, which is you Democrats are soft on crime. And does that add up to you?
I don't think my friend would do that here. Now, my friend down at the White House.
You wouldn't do that to the president either, would you?
But down at the White House, I'm not too sure. And let me tell you why. The president came up here, more than 200 days ago and said, 100 days I want a crime bill. We didn't get it. What did he do? He banged the Democratic Congress, I'm sorry to say, not the whole Congress, banged us for not doing it. Over 200 days have gone by. The president says, I want a crime bill, I want a crime bill. Now he's got one, or he can have one. Well, and if it isn't what he wants, I understand that. This bill isn't what I want. But he's for the death penalty. He's for the boot camps. He's for a correction in the habeas corpus, and this is a correction. It's not as good as one as I wanted. I supported the one that Alan Simpson wanted. But why not put a crime bill into force and effect and say, this is good for the country. Now try to do better, will you? And let's come back and improve it, shall we? Instead of making it a political issue, and that's what I think the president's up to, and that's what I predict's going to happen.
Is that what's happening, Senator
Let me tell you what's happening. They knew that we were going to leave here and the Democrat-controlled Congress wasn't going to do a crime bill and that George Bush would beat their brains out between now and we come back. So Foley had to press Jack Brooks. George Mitchell had to press Joe Biden, said, get this turkey out of here, dump it on the president, and he'll veto it, and we'll ram it in his ear like an ice pick.
We had a Republican senator here who would not approve the conferees. We waited around here more than 6 weeks.
That wasn't me, my friend.
No, it wasn't you.
And the balance was improper.
And I don't mind saying who was if I have to, because it was public knowledge. He would not approve the conferees. Why not? Because they didn't want a crime bill. Now, he happens to be a Republican.
That is not true. The break in the Senate Judiciary Committee is 8-6, and we were trying to stick with that same percentage in conference, like 5-4 or 4-3, and they refused to do it. They refused to let us have that break.
Senator Simpson, would you excuse people who would think that, having listened even to the two of you tonight, that this is a political argument, not an argument over substance?
You ain't kidding. That's all it is. This is not a crime bill. This is a turkey just in time for Thanksgiving.
Senator DeConcini?
Indeed it is. It is Thanksgiving time, and we have a chance to deliver, not a turkey, we have a chance to deliver a tough anti-crime bill if the president and the Republicans want it. If they don't, we don't get it. It's simple as that.
The politics of this, Senator Simpson, from your perspective, is that the Democrats have set the Republicans up for the president to veto this bill, and what you're saying, Senator DeConcini, is that the Democrats have been set up. Is that right?
I believe that if the president doesn't tell the Republicans up here that he wants a crime bill that has a death penalty and most of the things that he's campaigned for, we will not get a crime bill, and then he will blame the Democrats. If he wants a crime bill, he can have it. It's not perfect, but it's better than a good start. It's a real anti-crime bill.
And I've been here 13 years, and I've conferenced a lot of bills, and I've never seen a bill where we never saw the material and never saw the substance of the bill. It's absolutely absurd. It's a travesty.
Gentlemen, we've been here 13 minutes, but don't go away, because we're going to hear 2 more views, and then we're going to come back to you. Right. Judy Woodruff has the 2 additional views. Judy.
And those two views come from experts in crime and law enforcement. Joseph McNAMARA is the former police chief of San Jose, California. He is now a criminal justice research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Eugene METHVIN is a senior editor at Reader's Digest who has covered criminal justice issues for more than 40 years. He served on the President's Commission on Organized Crime from 1983 to 1986. Joseph McNamara, is this bill going to reduce crime?
I don't think so. I don't think either party is covering themselves with glory on this kind of bickering. Crime is a local problem, and Washington isn't going to have any great impact on it. But the American public is tired of this kind of squabbling on vital issues. I like some things in the bill. I like the idea that we'll have a waiting period for handguns, which is long overdue. I would love to see a provision banning assault rifles because we have one massacre after another. I think some cutbacks on the exclusionary rule are important, but I think the 52 new crimes for the death penalty are just an attempt by both parties to hoodwink the American public. It's not going to have any impact on the crime rate. I'm not opposed to the death penalty for terrorism and multiple murders and other crimes, but I don't think we should try to deceive the public. The death penalty bill will have no provision, no deterrent effect. It will not reduce crime in America.
All right, I want to get to the specifics in just a moment, but let me just stick with that first question, whether this bill is going to have a palpable effect in reducing crime in this country. Eugene METHVIN, if the bill were to pass, what we know of it today, would it reduce crime in this country?
Oh, I don't think it would.
No, I'm sorry. Let me switch to, okay. We heard your answer on that. Let me just switch to Mr. METHVIN now.
It will have a marginal but healthy impact. Death penalty for major drug dealers, yes. The failure to outlaw those assault weapons, I think, is a terrible omission in this bill. Most police in the country are for outlawing those weapons. The exclusionary rule, yes. Curbing the federal judiciary's extreme interpretations of the Constitution will have a healthy impact. The habeas corpus issue is important.
All right, I do want to go to the specifics. If you don't mind, let me just ask you about those one by one. But you're saying on balance it'll have some effect.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So you don't go along with either the Republican or the Democratic view that it either is going to greatly weaken or greatly strengthen?
I don't think it'll weaken anything, no.
All right, and Mr. McNamara, greatly weaken, greatly strengthen?
I don't think it will weaken anything either, and I think in the area of the exclusionary rule, the court is going to make its own rulings. They have been correcting some of the extremes of the exclusionary
You wouldn't agree
rule
with President Bush. You wouldn't agree with President Bush's argument that it's going to weaken the criminal justice.
This is part of the normal bargaining process. When a bill is passed, each side tries to get more of what they want in the bill, and the president is doing that, and so are both parties in Congress, and that's what the conference process is all about.
All right, let's talk specifically about the provisions. The death penalty. They've extended the death penalty to about, what is it, 51 new federal crimes that now would bring the death penalty. Eugene METHVIN, you said a moment ago you don't think it'll have a great effect.
Well, it'll have some effect, but the problem with the death penalty is it takes 10 years now between the judgment of guilt and the assessment of the death penalty and the execution, and that's because of the habeas corpus interpretations of the federal judiciary over the past 30 years. This
habeas corpus being the appeals that a person convicted.
The endless appeals of a convicted killer of his death sentence. Those appeals delay the execution of an average now of 10 years. And that's because the federal judiciary has used habeas corpus to conduct a campaign essentially of civil disobedience, of failure to carry out the judicial oath to enforce the laws and support the Constitution.
But specifically back on the death penalty, Joseph McNamara, how much of an impact is adding those federal crimes going to have?
I don't think it will have any. I think people will still appeal, and it shouldn't take 10 or 12 years for the appellate process. But the other side of that is these are local crimes, killing people. They have death penalties in the states, and that's adequate. This is mere partisan political stuff and rhetoric from Washington, so each party can go before the electorate in a couple of years and say, hey, we favor the death penalty. The trouble is dope dealers are going to deal dope because of the enormous profits. Whatever the penalties are, and that's been our experience for 80 years. It's not going to make the dope problem go away, and most people commit murder out of a crime of passion. They're not going to stop because Congress passed the death penalty.
All right, habeas corpus, you both have referred to this already. This again is appealing a criminal who has been convicted and sentenced for killing someone, sentenced to death, and continues to appeal. This is the habeas corpus. What they've done is put a new restriction on the use of this, so that there's a 1-year limit after which someone could not appeal. Is that correct?
Unless there are new facts found, but there are always ways to allege new facts. And the problem has been, and I disagree with Chief McNamara when he says Washington has no impact on local crime. Washington has a huge impact on local crime through the Supreme Court, which has taken over largely the administration of criminal justice. And now the Congress is attempting to curb some of those excesses in the habeas corpus area. However, this conference bill adopts a softer House position.
Well, because the Republicans were arguing, as I understood it, practically to eliminate habeas corpus appeals. Mr. McNamara, what effect would that have had if the Republicans had been able to get their way on this issue?
It would have had none, because the United States Supreme Court wouldn't have allowed it. In fact, the Supreme Court is making rulings over the past few years that have cut back the length of the appellate process, and I think the present makeup of the Supreme Court is likely to be a lot tougher on crime than Congress, either party, is going to be through this legislation.
And so this one, specifically on this one new restriction saying you can't appeal after 1 year unless there's new evidence, will that have a bearing on crime?
I don't think the United States Supreme Court is going to turn over their responsibilities on judging whether someone gets a fair trial and gets their constitutional rights to Congress.
All right, let's talk about the so-called exclusionary rule. This is permitting the use of evidence, some improperly or illegally seized evidence that's previously been unacceptable. The Republicans would have liked to have gone further than what's in the final bill and let all this evidence seized, even if without a warrant, let that be admissible in court. What finally passed was that only that evidence that if the officers who got it were acting in so-called good faith. Would this make any difference, Gene Methvin?
Yes, it will make a difference. The problem is that for 30 years, the Supreme Court has taken over and written a code of criminal procedures that could not have gotten through any legislature in America, federal, state, or local. And the Congress is now attempting to curb some of those excesses, specifically in the habeas corpus area and in the death penalty area, and in the search and seizure area. Don't forget, as is often said in Supreme Court opinions, the Constitution doesn't say there shall be no search and seizure. It says there shall be no unreasonable search and seizure. And what is unreasonable is a matter that is left largely to judges. Before 1961, it was left to state judges. The federal judges didn't take it up. But then suddenly the federal judges took it over. And then later, in 1965, they took over the whole regulation of police interrogation.
So is this going to make would this make a difference or not, this expanding the use?
Yes, it will make a difference.
Restricting the use of
Well, what we're talking about is restricting habeas corpus and expanding the use of evidence which the police sees in good faith, but which some federal judge may later come along and say is unreasonable. But that merely removes the argument from the question of whether it's unreasonable as to whether it's to whether it's good faith.
Okay, I guess I don't want to get completely lost here. Joseph McNamara, specifically on the exclusionary rule and what they've done to permit the use of some improperly seized evidence.
The court has already moved in that direction. Don't forget the exclusionary rule is a court rule, and the court can change that rule. They might listen to Congress on this kind of an issue because it's not strictly an interpretation of constitutional rights, and it's quite true that some of the exclusionary rulings that wouldn't let the jury hear evidence of guilt did go too far. Originally, the rule was passed to stop police third-degree methods, and it hasn't really worked the way it should. I think it's time to take a new look at it. There are better ways to control the police than letting convicted or guilty people who should be convicted go free because we won't let the jury see the evidence of their guilt. I think we should and must control police misconduct, but by letting guilty people go free, I don't think that's the kind of message of justice that we want to send to the American people.
The 5-day waiting period, which says you must, of course, wait 5 days so that the law enforcement officials can search your background. Gene Methvin, is that a move in the right direction?
Well, it's a move in the right direction. It's a tiny step. I'm not sure it's been called the Brady Bill, and I'm not sure it would have helped Jim Brady. I think Hinckley may have had his weapon long before that. He'd been stalking presidents. Before Reagan even became president, he stalked Jimmy Carter.
I don't think that that's going to make any major difference. What would make a major difference is this assault weapon question, and the Senate
had that in there,
and the Democrats in the House took it out.
Mr. McNamara, on the same point.
I agree it's not a panacea, but it's a very important symbolic message to send to combat the Rambo mentality that the National Rifle Association and the gun manufacturers have been selling to this country for 30 years. And law enforcement is solidly behind the Brady bill, and we need not only to have that bill, but to have the assault rifles outlawed too. And this is an area where we should rise above partisan politics. The president should support it, and so should the Democrats in Congress.
All right, gentlemen, stay with us. Jim?
Yes, back to Capitol Hill, to Senators Simpson and DeCONCINI. Senator DeCONCINI, would you concede some of the point that Chief McNamara was making, that particularly in light of on the issue of the gun legislation, that there's more of a symbolic impact than there is going to be a real impact on crime in America?
I do agree with that. I think the assault provision, which I authored, I'm really disappointed that it didn't go in. I think it might have had a real impact. Nobody knows for sure, but I felt it was worth a try, and that's why we had a sunset provision in it, because of the fear of the Second Amendment, those who believe in that so strongly. I want to make one correction. I said that the National Association of Police Chiefs is 135,000 members that they represent, and I made an error in the first part of the program. But to get back to your answer, I think it probably is symbolic what we did here, but as was said, it's a first step.
How do you feel about that, Senator Simpson? Do you think that the 5-day waiting period is going to have any effect on crime in America?
I don't know, but I happen to live in Wyoming. That's where I was raised and live. That's my principal home, and I'm living here temporarily near the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia has the toughest gun laws in the United States, and they kill more people in this community than any other community in the United States. I think that ought to answer that question.
So I take it that's a no.
It sure is. It's bizarre.
And you also were not in favor of the assault weapon ban that Senator DeCONCINI sponsored. Is that correct?
I did not support Senator DeCONCINI in the Senate, and the House took it all the way, and that was out in conference. So I did not support Dennis DeCONCINI, and yet I certainly think there are certain weapons that should be under careful surveillance as not meeting the test of a true sportsman's weapon, and we're going to have to revisit that at some appropriate time.
An interesting point on that subject, the president already has banned 43 assault weapons from being imported. These are made in foreign countries now, and in the provision that was in the Senate bill, 7 of those would have been legislated instead of just by executive order. So it's unfortunate we didn't get a crack at it to see if it would work.
But remember, the Democrats overrode that in the House.
I have to agree with my friend that the Democrats on the House made a big mistake.
Senator DeCONCINI, I want to go to both of you on this, but beginning with you, Chief McNamara made the general comment to Judy just now that essentially what the debate that he just listened to between the two of you a few moments ago, and that the debate that's going on in Congress about this crime bill is basically an irrelevancy. That 51, well, he went through the whole thing, but adding 51 death penalties, or death penalty to 51 crimes and all of this sort of thing is not going to have one iota of effect on crime in this country, and that it's basically a political thing, so each side can go home and say, hey, look, we voted for a tough crime bill.
Well, I know the chief, and I respect him a great deal, but I disagree with him, because not only does it institute a death penalty on the federal level with the right constitutional procedures, we believe, that will be upheld by the Supreme Court, it's very important that I think that the United States government go on record that some offenses are going to have the maximum penalty. But the things that it does do that is so positive for enforcement outside of Washington, D.C., if you want to call it, outside the Beltway, is the 8,000 new prison positions by forming boot camps. The over $1 billion that goes directly to local law enforcement for assistance. This is something that is long overdue, and I think even the chief would have to agree that, by God, they need some help on the local level if we really want to have war. This bill starts that help.
Chief McNamara, would you agree?
Well, I think we ought to declare an end to the war and the beginning of a public health campaign. I think our money would be spent a lot better reducing the demand for these drugs, because millions of Americans are spending billions of dollars on these drugs, creating an economic force due to the potential profit, and no amount of boot camps or prisons are going to stop that. I think the boot camps are a sensible step, but I think we ought to step back and take a look at the more fundamental part of the problem, and that is the profit keeps this going around, and it's the demand for drugs.
If I can just interrupt, this bill has over $1 billion in treatment and education programs, new money. And I think that's very important, and I agree with the chief that you have to attack it both ways. Now, maybe the chief doesn't feel as strong as he used to about enforcement, but I feel very strong on both sides, both enforcement, treatment, and education. I think you have to do both, and that's the war we're talking about, is a three-pronged war.
Senator Simpson, I realize you're opposed to the bill. I realize you're not sure what's in it, but I realize you're also opposed to what you do know that's in it. But even if it was strengthened, do you believe that this bill, even in a strengthened form, would have a measurable effect on crime in the United States?
If these things are corrected, where we come back to where we know what we have, and the House version, as I say, was known, the Senate, if we can do that, there's $3 billion in this bill. That's a great advantage, and it goes to law enforcement people on the local level. With the death penalty, with an appropriate habeas, without this repealing of case law, with the exclusionary rule, without fun and games, and that's in there, then I think, yes, you'd have a good, strong crime bill that both parties could be proud of. But right now, I've never seen one like this in all my time here. We have not seen the bill, and it's 20-7 in the East, and we haven't seen it yet.
Mr. Methvin, how do you feel about when you look at the problem of crime in this country and then you see what the Congress is debating and voting on? Do you believe that there is a connection between what the average American feels the crime problem is and what is being resolved in Washington in a general way?
I think
Mr. Methvin.
I think the public is going to be very confused about this. I think most people agree that we need to be doing a lot better job teaching youngsters right from wrong, and that's not addressed by this. I think there are some good things in the bill, as I mentioned, but I think probably it should have come up much earlier in the session so that the public and the various media could describe to the public just what we're talking about. It is confusing to have so many complex issues come up at the last moment.
The question was for Mr. Methvin. Quickly, sir, I'm sorry.
Yes, I think there's a connection. The American people want action, and the Congress is trying to do something, at least to appear to do something. However, when we talk about habeas corpus, most people don't understand it. Joe Biden said this morning that the president can't explain in 30-second sound bites what the habeas corpus court decisions are all about. Well, I can explain to you in 30 seconds. I can explain it in 4 words. It's a fraud to pass all of these death penalties and not shorten the appeals process, which the federal judiciary has imposed on death penalties.
All right. All right.
All right.
We have
I think it's important to know that there is a 1-year limit.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. With all of you talking, we have to leave it right there. Thank you very much.
Still ahead, the risks of living in the California hills and a Jim Fisher essay. Fires like the one that engulfed more than 1,000 acres of trees in a Los Angeles suburb today have become a fact of life in California. Last month, a much more devastating fire destroyed hundreds of homes in Oakland and Berkeley. Inevitably, the questions that follow focus on how to prevent such disasters in the future. Correspondent Spencer Michaels of public station KQED San Francisco has this report on the search for answers.
From almost any angle, but especially from the East Bay Hills, the view of San Francisco Bay is alluring and beautiful. That's why Jim Penowich bought a house here 20 years ago, a house that was completely destroyed by the Oakland fire.
I was only 29 years old when I bought it, and I didn't think about fire in those days, and just thought about what a beautiful setting it is and how lucky I was to be able to afford to buy a house up there.
Penowich, a television engineer and avid sports fan, lost nearly everything. Several cars, his baseball card collection, his clothes, antique furniture, and a house he had worked on continuously. Since the fire, he's spent hours at the site.
Well, I've been busy trying to find anything left. So I've tried not to think about the enormity of it all. Although I have my moments where I'm you know, cry a little bit, sure. It's impossible not to, just looking around. One part of me wants to rebuild, because I love this area. And another part of me wants to run away and hide.
Should he rebuild, and that depends in part on how much insurance money he gets, he will join thousands of others who want back almost precisely what they lost. The question is, can they recover the ambience and rebuild the structures the fire destroyed? And as a matter of safety, should they?
The whole fire is coming out! Will you get on this?
The October 20th fire in the Oakland and Berkeley Hills left 5,000 people homeless, 25 dead, and caused at least $1.5 billion in damage. The fire roared unchecked for a full day as fire departments were slow to fully respond. Water pressure was low and access was difficult. The fire occurred in completely residential, well-to-do neighborhoods, with much of the damage covered by insurance. When the residents, like Jim Penowitz, start to rebuild, they will face the same conditions that made the hills risky to build on in the first place.
Building on a hillside is an extremely dangerous thing to do for both the soils and earthquake reasons and also for fire. Every year there are fires like this. There have been fires regularly in the history of the East Bay.
At the University of California at Berkeley, close to the fire, the dean of the College of Environmental Design is Roger Montgomery, an architect and planner.
There's no question that if you're going to live in California, you got to pay for it. And California is an expensive place to live. We got to move water hundreds of miles. We have to protect ourselves against an inflammable landscape. And we've got to also build in a way which is in itself not hazardous.
As Montgomery points out, it is man's presence that has made these hills more flammable.
You have a ladder? Yeah, get the ladder out now and put it up on the roof.
Even in areas not touched by flames, the hazards are easy to spot. Homes are built as close to nature as possible, with trees and shrubs intertwined with the architecture. Shake and shingle roofs are commonplace, though fire officials say they catch fire much more easily than tile roofs. In California, lumber interests have prevented the legislature from banning untreated wooden roofs, though now once again there is talk of such a law. Streets in the hills are twisty and narrow, giving the area a rural feeling that the residents find charming. Fire trucks, however, find such roads difficult and sometimes impossible to navigate. Water, not just in the hills, but in much of coastal California, is precious, especially in these drought years. The lakes in the East Bay Hills were inadequate to provide pressure, and pumps failed because of power outages. Fire protection was, in Dean Montgomery's opinion, not adequate for the risks of living the California hillside lifestyle. With such complete devastation, you might think that the city of Oakland would welcome the opportunity to rebuild the area, to replan to make sure that the problems that happened this time don't happen again. But that is not the case. Oakland intends to rebuild the area just like it was before. The city has put a priority on expediting the building permit process and expects a flurry of construction to begin in the spring. City officials do not envision changing the basic structure or look of the area. Alvin James is city planner for Oakland.
A lot of people tend to think, well, okay, because the fire has essentially cleaned the landscape, if you will, that it presents an opportunity to sort of wipe the slate clean and begin again. That isn't entirely true. I mean, the physical facilities are still there. You still have streets that are in the general locations where they were before. You still have sewer lines and utilities that are all there. We are looking at how to balance the issues of trying to get people back in as quickly as possible against the at least minimum additional features that have to be put into place to increase safety.
Oakland architect Rosemary Muller, here with a client whose house was destroyed, agrees that the city should not try to replan the area. She is chair of an emergency Chamber of Commerce-sponsored design committee.
I'm working with a bunch of architects, and architects, of course, you give them a cleared out site, and the first thing they want to do is redesign the whole thing. So one of the first things you have to do is calm them down a little bit in the interest of the community, and people whose houses are burned out are saying, but there is still a community here. It may all be burned, it may have to be rebuilt, but we don't want to start from zero. We want to start from where we were when the fire hit and go on from there.
While practically all the emphasis from officials and residents is on recreating what was here before, Oakland City Councilman Dick Spies says he wants more fire protection and has for a long time.
I, for example, had argued for additional fire department on the hills and more sense of readiness. I believe that budget does have a factor to play in this, and I think that we're going to have to look at that and really ask our citizens, what is the level of protection you really want?
Spies argues that the 1978 passage of Proposition 13, California's tax and budget cutting measure, resulted in significant cuts and later stagnation in fire protection.
It will take more money to really get us up to speed, both in terms of the water services in the hill area, but also probably the fire services.
Spies is also pushing hard to replace the non-native eucalyptus and Monterey pine trees that burned so furiously during the fire. Within a few days of the fire, some of the damaged eucalyptus and pines were being removed as a safety measure. But city officials were being cautious in ordering property owners, who are also voters, to cut down trees on their lots. Fire-resistant redwoods will be planted throughout the hills. One lumber company has donated 50,000 seedlings. And with winter coming on, helicopters are dropping grass seed on the barren hillsides to prevent erosion. Despite these efforts, because of budget problems and the demands of a popular lifestyle, major changes will be difficult to achieve.
Well, there may be some changes in terms of building materials. It wouldn't surprise me if wood-shake roofs get outlawed. It wouldn't surprise me if fire-rated walls become required. It's even possible that sprinklers inside houses will be required, residential sprinkler systems. But these are things that will not cause a change in the basic structure of the community, and not necessarily even a change in its appearance.
Dean Montgomery doesn't think those changes will be enough to make a big difference.
I think what's likely to happen is that we're going to not build back very much better than what was left, and so California will, somewhere along the line, experience this again.
Just a few blocks away from the fire, new home construction proceeds on a heavily wooded lot. Those who have lived in the California hills and those who aspire to seem to think the risks are well worth taking.
We close tonight with an essay. Today, the Senate voted to spend $500 million to help the Soviets dismantle their nuclear weapons. That is part of the reaction to President Bush's announcement a few weeks ago to reduce America's nuclear arms. Jim Fisher, columnist for the Kansas City Star, has some reaction from Missouri, where many of America's missile silos are located.
People welcomed the speech, but to most Americans it was pretty much of an abstraction. Oh, they knew there were missiles somewhere out in the country. That part you either fly over or doze through on the Chicago to LA Amtrak. They knew there were some antiseptic-looking control rooms in the ground, shielded with massive steel doors, that inside the silos were rockets and young, scrubbed Air Force officers with keys and codes to launch the ICBMs once, God forbid, the order came down. What they really knew mostly came from television. Night launches of the Minuteman missile from Vandenberg or Cape Canaveral. Smoke and fire against the sky. Monotone voices announcing another successful, usually, or unsuccessful, rarely, test firing. Only once was there a hint. In the made-for-television movie The Day After, spectators in the Memorial Stadium in Lawrence, Kansas, looked up from a football game and saw the missiles streaking into the sky, headed over the North Pole to the Soviet Union. It was an arresting scene. Fiction, of course, because that was a movie with dramatic license. Actually, there aren't any missiles within 80 miles of Lawrence. But the scene worked, especially out here in Missouri, because people knew what really was in their own backyards. This is missile F3, just northwest of Cole Camp, Missouri. It is one of 150 Minuteman missiles in west central Missouri.
It's one missile, but several warheads, multiple independent reentry vehicles, or MIRVs, a nice government acronym. Several nuclear weapons, one missile. Scary, you bet. But not so much these past few weeks. The nuclear weapons are still inside the silos. But the controversy now is not megatonnage, but on how to dispose of them. There's relief here, though. The missile crews have stood down. The missiles have become like cars without starters. Out here, we've lived with these things since the early 1960s. 30 years of chain link fences and the concrete pads inside. 30 years of little brown and white signs, one saying N6 or F2 or D8, knowing down deep that one letter and one number spelled Armageddon. Nuclear war, if it came, meant the Soviets would just heave a bunch of similar missiles this way. No pinpoint accuracy, no surgical strikes. Goodbye, western Missouri. Goodbye, the Dakotas and eastern Montana, where the other Minutemen bases are. Oddly enough, we got used to it. There was a black-humored admonition that if you were driving down some Missouri back road and saw a Minuteman come roaring out of its silo, the best thing to do was to stop, bend over, and kiss a certain part of your anatomy goodbye. Oddly, people being people, adapted. They grew crops and grazed cows right up to the chain link. They didn't get out and march because they believed their country had to have a credible defense. If that meant Minutemen, so be it. A few marched. Some got inside the fences and beat on the silos with sledgehammers and poured red dye on them. They went to jail with the approval of most folks out here. With the president's speech, things changed. Oh, nothing you can really see. The missiles are still there. So are old habits. Take Jack Hutchison, an auctioneer who lives near Versailles, Missouri. Not long ago, he put up an old wooden Stover windmill on his farm. It's a beauty. 144 blades, hand-finished, looking after restoration, as good as it did the day it came out of the factory over in Illinois in the late 1870s. Being probably the last of its kind, the windmill draws lots of sightseeing. How does Jack tell people to get here? Turn right at the missile, he says, of his neighboring silo, and everybody understands, not even thinking. I'm Jim Fisher.
Again, the main stories of this Monday. President Bush threatened to veto anti-crime legislation now headed for a final vote in Congress. And presidential spokesman Marlin Fitzwater said White House Chief of Staff John Sununu was not in danger of losing his job. Good night, Jim.
Good night, Robin. We'll see you tomorrow night. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Funding for the News Hour has been provided by AT&T. AT&T connects the world, from equipment to networking, from computers to communications. AT&T, the right choice. And by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And by the financial support of viewers like you. This is PBS.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television. And the Iowa broadcast is made possible by CRST, a family-owned company based in Iowa and a major truck carrier in the United States, which is proud to support the MacNeil-Lehrer News Hour.
You are viewing Iowa Public Television. Tonight, look at heating the home of the future and see barns of the past find new life. Then explore Florida's swamps and Midwestern prairies.
From the swamps of the South to the grasslands of the Midwest, European settlers pushed back the frontiers of North America. In Florida, the conquistadors were searching for gold. In the Midwest, Lewis and Clark were looking for a river route to the Pacific. What they found was a world unlike any they had seen before. See it for yourself next time on Land of the Eagle, a nature special presentation.
And take another look at Iowa tonight through Wednesday at 8.
Next time on Frontline,
all of us, all hostages.
the untold story of Terry Waite and Oliver North.
North was, I'm sure, delighted to have discovered Terry Waite.
Was Terry Waite a victim of Oliver North's secret deals to trade arms for hostages?
He provided cover for North's operation, because it made it much easier for North to conceal what was really going on.
The secret story of Terry Waite, a Frontline special report.
See it tomorrow night at 10:30.
Iowa Public Television, TV